Welcome to the Carl Jackson Show. Guys, if George Floyd was white, Derek Chauvin would not be serving time in prison. On the day of George Floyd's death, he had 2 clogged arteries, he had COVID, and most importantly, that particular day, he had a deadly amount of fentanyl in his system. Now, what we've seen over the last few years is America's judicial system, which used to be the gold standard of the world, has been turned on its head. Justice is no longer blind. Now you'll get justice based upon who you vote for, what your political philosophy is, what your skin color might be, what religion or faith you withhold to. Just because of this case. We've got the defund the police movement. We've got Juneteenth as a result of this. And we've got a media narrative that Derek Chauvin was a racist and an AG that claimed otherwise. And we never heard that evidence. You're going to hear it now. Welcome to the Carl Jackson Show. Today we're going to be talking about justice for Derek Chauvin. That's right. Not justice for George Floyd, but justice for Derek Chauvin. The Supreme Court has rejected or declined to consider Derek Chauvin's appeal of the George Floyd murder conviction, of his George Floyd murder conviction. And I think that they have it absolutely wrong. So we're going to be diving into this case. There has been new evidence that has emerged. Also, a new movie that is coming out where a prosecutor or a reporter, a journalist in the Minneapolis area has come out with a movie where she details evidence and video that was not shown to the public. In fact, and so we're going to be breaking down this case a little bit, and I'm going to try and make the case why it is very important that we learn the truth about this case, and in my opinion, that the Supreme Court will eventually garner the courage to release this man, Derek Chauvin, regardless of how you feel about him, regardless of how you feel about George Floyd. If justice is to be blind, then we have to see Derek Chauvin released. I know there's not a lot of people in the media that are going to have the courage to say this. We're going to say it here on the Salem News Channel. We're going to say it here on the Carl Jackson Show. I do believe that America at one point in time had the gold standard when it came to our justice system. That is no longer the case. We've seen a complete breakdown and an erosion of our justice system within the last few years that is absolutely disgusting, both on local levels, national levels. We see it with the DOJ, and it's got to stop. And I do believe that this case was the impetus of a lot of what we're seeing going on around the country with defunding the police and so on. I want to play this clip for you. This is the this is the AG in Minnesota, the Attorney General. This is Keith Ellison. For those of you that might recall, Keith Ellison is a radical, all right, a radical left-winger. He is a professed Muslim. He is a racist. He is a bigot. This is a guy that wanted, in my opinion, to go after whites. And if you recall how crazy times were in 2020, you couldn't have, if you're Derek Chauvin, you couldn't have arrested a black man where he died on you in a worse area with this guy, Keith Ellison, in charge. But here's something that doesn't get played and hasn't been played much for the public. And I do want you to hear this. This is Keith Ellison stating, and we'll play this again at the end of the show, but I just want to start off here. Keith Ellison saying that there was never any evidence of racial animus in this case. Unfortunately, the media didn't report this, and the public didn't know it. Let's go ahead and roll the clip, please, Gabe.
Hate crimes are crimes where there's an explicit motive and of bias. We don't have any evidence that Derek Chauvin factored in George Floyd's race as he did what he did.
You could have charged him with a hate crime under Minnesota law, and you chose not to.
Could have, but we only charge those crimes that we had evidence that we could put in front of a jury to prove.
Okay, so that's the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, saying there was no evidence that there was ever any racial animus in the case of Derek Chauvin and what is now a murder conviction Basically, Derek Chauvin serving 22 years, 1/10 of his sentence in. We'll go through that. So no evidence of racial animus. That would have been nice for the public to have known that at the time. So here's the deal, guys. America's justice system, again, used to be the gold standard of the world. That is no longer the case. Sadly, what we're witnessing across the nation is Lady Justice and her blindfolds that have been removed, or her blindfold has been removed. So now what you get is a two-tier justice system, as some would claim. All right, some would say, listen, we've got a two-tier justice system where, you know, depending on what side of the aisle politically you fall on, or what views you may have, or what church or religion you may belong to, then justice, it might be blind for some. But if you happen to be a conservative, if you happen to be a Republican, if you happen to be a Christian, dare I say, if you happen to be a white male, then you might not, depending on your locale, experience true justice in the United States of America any longer, particularly when you have news cameras and reporters that are paying very close attention to your case. And I do believe this is exactly what happened, with Derek Chauvin. I believe, it is my opinion, that Derek Chauvin is innocent of the crimes that he was convicted of and thus sentenced to 22 years in prison for. Guys, did you know that there was a manual that existed? Now, I remember, I won't give the names of the outlets, but I remember writing columns and trying to have them, or trying to send them in to be published, even for, you know, some conservative sites at the time, and they refused to take my column. Now, sometimes columns are refused just because they suck. This wasn't one of them. I could kind of tell when columns might be, and I just had to post it on my own site, or if some of these publications would take it, some of these national publications would take it. This was a good one. And what I did, I basically made the case based on evidence that I had been reading, based on the Minneapolis Police Department instruction manual, and I forget what it was called, but there is the procedure, the tactic that Derek Chauvin used to submit George Floyd was in existence. I mean, was trained. They were trained on it. As a matter of fact, Gabe, if you would get that video together, shortly here, we'll be playing that for you. Also, there was another incident where you might not have heard this, but a year prior to the confrontation that Derek Chauvin and three of his fellow police officers had with George Floyd, a very similar, almost exact scenario took place with George Floyd, where he inhaled drugs after he was pulled over by the police officers. So there was a lot of video that was not played for the public, and perhaps if it were, perhaps we wouldn't have experienced the riots of 2020, the George Floyd riots, what I'm branding the George Floyd riots of 2020. On occasion, I will say the BLM and Antifa riots, because they were all involved. But those riots were devastating across the country. There was an article, and we'll play this video courtesy of Fox News. I don't think we have enough time in this particular stint, Gabe, if you could throw that clock back up for me to play this particular video. But there is one that we have of the technique that was used, and we have actually video of Derek Chauvin using that very technique a few years prior. All right, so that's where we are now. There was an article written at Revolver News, for those of you that know that publication, and in that article, the exact topic outlining how our judicial system, including our juries, have collapsed, highlighting the case about Derek Chauvin, again the Minneapolis police officer. There is no evidence that he was racist at all, and again, even jurors, I don't trust them anymore. I don't trust them. When you have an onslaught of media attention, it is virtually impossible, in my opinion, to get a fair trial, particularly if you're going to stay in the very same venue. There's no way Derek Chauvin was ever going to get a fair trial in Minnesota. I don't believe in the state, period. Maybe there are pockets, rural pockets of red where people hadn't been paying as much attention to the media coverage. Perhaps where there weren't a bunch of leftists that were anxious to get a hold of a white man and kind of lynch him, if you will, have a public or digital or media lynching of him, if you will. But I do want to read part of this article that appeared in Revolver News, and it says the Anglo-American common law was supposed to save Derek Chauvin. That it failed says a lot about the America we all actually live in now. It's been 2.5 years since the former Minneapolis police officer was convicted of murder for the death of drug addict and lifelong criminal George Floyd. Chauvin is barely 1/10 into his 22-year prison sentence, where he is currently serving concurrently a 21-year federal sentence for depriving Floyd of his civil rights, the article says. The article goes on. The Chauvin verdict was an obvious sick joke from the moment it happened, but even on the American right, the full realization of this fact seems to have taken until the last few weeks. Now, I'm not sure that that's the case. I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. I believe that even many people on the right were afraid to tell the truth about this case. Or perhaps some just got emotionally worked up watching the video. That can never happen in America. Justice must be justice. We'll be back. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. And guys, I do want to say thank you to Mike Lindell and MyPillow for helping us to make this show possible. You can go to mypillow.com. They've got lots of deals available for you coming up to this Christmas holiday season. So please take advantage of the deals. MyPillow.com, promo code Carl, or give them a call, 800-858-0263. MyPillow.com, promo code Carl. Click on that radio podcast square at the top of your page. All right, getting back to this deal with Derek Chauvin. This is very important. I do believe that this case must be reversed. I'm so disappointed that the Supreme Court did not hear this case or rejected Derek Chauvin's appeal. I do believe, listen, I know that people are scared. I get it. I understand. We don't want to see what happened in 2020 happen again, particularly with the feckless president that we have in the United States right now, watching over us, if you will. And that is Daddy Joe Biden. I get it. But guys, if we're ever going to restore the rule of law in the United States of America, some of the injustice that we've witnessed over the last several years must be corrected. I believe that Derek Chauvin must be released, just like I do believe that some of the J6 protesters need to be released. Not all, but I believe that a lot of the J6 protesters are innocent of the charges in which they're being persecuted for. Now, there are some that are not, and those that are not should pay the price. 10 years, 22 years? I don't think so. I think that is extreme, and I think that's simply based upon their political beliefs. I don't know what Derek Chauvin's political beliefs are, but I suspect, listen, he's a white man, all right? He's a police officer, and that was all the left needed. The left needed a martyr headed into 2020. They were afraid to lose to Donald Trump. The economy was booming, boom. Then you have the Russia collusion hoax, you have the Ukraine impeachment. Suddenly we have COVID, and obviously COVID was a big deal, a major global pandemic, no doubt about it. But all of a sudden we implement these lockdowns, we change the way that we vote. And then if that weren't enough, you always have to have your Trayvon Martins, your Michael Browns. Well, here comes George Floyd. The left always has to make sure that they work their voters up in anger. All right, now here's the video. Here's a video of Derek Chauvin practicing the exact same technique that he was trained to use in his Minneapolis Police Department manual. Guys, I've seen the pictures. I wrote about this. He was never, if you watch the video, I want you, and we should have had this video, forgive me, but you can go back and watch the video, and I want you to observe the video closely of Derek Chauvin not kneeling on George Floyd's neck. I'm about to share some information with you. He was not on his neck, but he was on his upper shoulder. That's where his placement is. Let's go ahead and run this video. For those of you that are watching, I want you to pay close attention to this technique. Now, this video occurred 3 years before George Floyd. Derek Chauvin using the exact same technique to subdue a suspect or a perpetrator. Let's roll the video, please, Gabe.
Released videos from 2017 kneeling on 2 different people's necks 3 years before he killed George Floyd using the same now banned technique.
Now, it's not exactly on the neck, all right? It is literally the upper back shoulder blade. It looks like it. Now, so it's not actually damaging the windpipe or choking you or anything like that. I know even some mixed martial artists have come out and said, listen, go back and watch the video. You could see Derek Chauvin's knee on the back of George Floyd's neck area, but not on his neck where he's blocking the airwave, and his black pants distorts the video. You have to look closely. But anyway, and we'll get to some testimony. But I believe this is a very, very important point. Well, nonetheless, there have been new developments on the case. Chauvin was accused of killing Floyd because he was a racist. Now, you've already heard the video of Keith Ellison earlier on saying that, hey, there was no evidence that this was based upon any type of racial animus whatsoever. All right. And as a result of Floyd's death, massive changes were made in policing to deal with quote unquote systemic racism. Tucker Carlson also talked about this on his X channel with his X platform, formerly known as Twitter. And I want to go through some of those changes. But imagine, if you will, imagine if the narrative hadn't been that Derek Chauvin was racist. Imagine if the media had simply told the truth, that you had George Floyd, who was hyped up on drugs, that had ingested fentanyl, a deadly dose of fentanyl, which was going to make it very difficult for him to breathe, slow his heart down tremendously, and then with the added pressure of being arrested, or the added stress or anxiety of being arrested, how the guy could essentially kill over. So what changes have come to pass as a result of this hoax, as a result of this lie that Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd? Guys, we cannot let this injustice go. I don't care what names you call me an American, because I want the rule of law to be restored in the United States of America. And guys, I don't believe we have that anymore. I don't believe that with the media onslaught on paying attention to any particular case that you can get a fair jury. I'm not even convinced. I hate to say this about my America. I'm not even convinced that jurors know their jobs when they go into a courtroom, even if it is described to them by an attorney. The evidence has to be overwhelming. The evidence has to be irrefutable. And that is not what we see happening in some of these major cases across the country. So what changes have come to pass that have only served to hurt more Americans and more black and minority communities in particular? How about decriminalizing many other criminal offenses? How about the defunding the police movement that has only served to hurt lower income black and minority communities in the hood, if you will, where police officers now pull back? If you're a Derek Chauvin, if you're an honest police officer out to do a hard day's work, and guys, listen to me. We don't deal, you and I, the average civilian, this is where I give police officers grace. I'm not saying all police officers are perfect. I know there's some dirty cops out there. I know that. I know there's some racist cops out there. I know that. We all know that. We all get that. But I would argue that the vast majority of cops are good guys that are going out there and earning an honest day's pay and trying to keep our streets safe. This is easy for me. You and I, imagine the stress that you deal with going home with your kids or having an argument with your spouse or something like that. All right, imagine that little bit of, those small issues and what you feel. Now, imagine people that deal with the criminal element every single day. Every single day. And the worst of the worst. Not in all cases. Sometimes they're petty crimes, traffic stops, so on, etc. But they deal with the worst of the worst. And they get to see it daily. They're human beings. They're human beings. Of course, they're going to be shaped by these confrontations, if you will. But just look at how the landscape, America's landscape, has changed since George Floyd. Defunding the police? What officer in their right mind, or what person, man or woman in their right mind, is going to want to become a cop, particularly in a blue state or blue city? And who's that going to hurt? Where is crime most rampant? Crime is going to be most rampant in cities, in lower income boroughs, black and minority areas. Crime is going to be more rampant. That is just the truth. So now if a police officer sees a crime taking place, that police officer is going to sit there and instead of reacting to the crime and going after the perpetrator, now the police officer is going to have to second guess that and say, should I even bother? And if that police officer backs off, then what happened? What happens? Then you get another victim to a crime. And that's happening over and over and over again. It's unbelievable. You know what else has come out of it? Well, we got a holiday. We got a new federal holiday, Juneteenth. Woohoo! A new holiday that continues to perpetuate the lie that blacks in America are victims today, instead of celebrate where we've all come. But thanks to George Floyd, we got that. You have an overwhelming amount of television commercials, and Tucker Carlson brilliantly outlined this in his X platform. You've got an abundant amount of black and brown or minority commercials now, where you would think the overwhelming amount of people that reside in the United States are black or Latino and not white. We also got J6ers jailed while Antifa and BLM rioters walked. We'll be back. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving or you are looking forward to having a wonderful Thanksgiving. And by now, by the time you're seeing this on Salem News Channel, you did have a wonderful Thanksgiving. But I would implore you to look deeper into this case for yourself. I believe that this is a great injustice, this case against Derek Chauvin and the 3 other officers that are serving time as a result of this of George Floyd's untimely death, a death in which he brought upon himself. All right, so I believe the worst thing that came out of this the George Floyd situation is what I'm calling the wrongful conviction of Derek Chauvin. That's the worst thing to come out of it. Carl, how could you say that? A man died, and then now there's a man that is spending time for that sentence. Guys, first off, only someone that hasn't been to jail would say something like that. But I would go, especially when there's an enormous amount of evidence to suggest otherwise, and evidence that you simply have not been shown. I look forward to interviewing this journalist that has created this movie that is coming out based upon this whole entire case. because I do believe that this case turned the judicial system back 50 years, but in a different direction. Instead of whites, I think, being wrongfully convicted and charged in some cases, now I think you're going to see, and you are seeing whites, seeing that happening to whites. And in my opinion, that has happened with Derek Chauvin. We are now discovering that Derek Chauvin has not, in fact, murdered George Floyd. And that it is because of a current court case that has been brought forth in Hennepin County, Minnesota, by a prosecutor by the name of Amy Sweezy, who is suing her boss. And I want to get to that. I've talked about that before on my podcast, but I want to refresh your memory, if you will. But before we do that, courtesy of Fox News, we have some video here that I'd like to show you from Jesse Waters' program. A new and it is regarding the new, I shouldn't say movie, I've been saying movie, but a new documentary that looks into the death of George Floyd. This is a police officer that arrested George Floyd or pulled him over in 2019, and basically it was almost like the exact same type stop. Let's go ahead and roll this particular video. I do want to warn you, this video is long. We may cut it off as we go. I will talk through it. Gabe, if you keep my mic on, and I'll speak up where I need to. Let's go ahead and roll the video. Por favor, Gabe.
The fall of Minneapolis, it's packed with new information about George Floyd that we weren't allowed to see in the summer of 2020, so our cities could burn and Biden could win. The producer, an award-winning journalist named Liz Collin, sacrificed her career to tell the story. How has your reporting on George Floyd affected you professionally?
I was demoted, lost my position that I had for nearly a dozen years. But really what bothered me most about all of this is that the truth wasn't being told. And, these men and women, Minneapolis really lost the best of the best when it came to its police force. And we've seen this, sadly, all across the country. And they need their voice back. And I hope in a way that this movie can do that.
Since the riots broke out, the Minneapolis police force lost more than 300 cops. They told Colin they were sick and tired of being labeled racist by the Democrats and the press.
Going to work, though, was physically making me ill. It wasn't the flu. It wasn't a cold. It wasn't anything that I could put my finger on. It wasn't something that went away. It was the drive into the city, the knot in my stomach, the I'm going to vomit, I'm going to be sick.
I left the job about a month after the protests. I just couldn't do it anymore.
My father was a police officer. I grew up in Minneapolis. My family was here. I didn't want to leave. It was the hardest thing I ever did in my life.
America's cities were pillaged because Americans were denied the truth. And now we know the truth. For example, we didn't know George Floyd died with a deadly amount of fentanyl in his system, 2 clogged arteries, and COVID-19. We didn't know the FBI held a meeting with the medical examiner before the autopsy changed. Americans also weren't told that Floyd was arrested in 2019 in Minneapolis and had an eerily similar confrontation with police.
In 2020, George Floyd says, I got shot last time.
Man, I got shot last time. Same way, man.
And you would have been the last officer to arrest George Floyd. Did you shoot him?
No, I didn't shoot him. No. The body camera is out there. It shows exactly what I did, exactly what the other officers did. No, we didn't shoot him.
How was George Floyd acting during that arrest in 2019?
Everything was almost identical. I mean, the initial stop, when I first started to approach him, he was uncooperative. He wasn't listening to my commands. He was very agitated.
Just keep your hands out where I can see them. Hey! Let me. Keep your hands where I can see them.
Let me see your hands. Stay in the car. Let me see your other hand.
The officer from that 2019 arrest of George Floyd, Officer Scott Creighton, joins me now. Officer, what did you pull George Floyd over for then?
It was during a narcotics arrest that we were conducting.
So you pulled him over, you approached the vehicle. What happened?
When I initially approached him, I couldn't see his hands. He was moving around. I believe he was eating narcotics. I repeated commands to see his hands. And then I got him to see his hands, and we ended up with another officer, several officers, my sergeant. We ended up getting him out of the vehicle and handcuffing him.
So you believe that he swallowed some narcotics?
Yes, I believe so. That's what he was. He was found in possession of narcotics on his person, and there was narcotics found in the vehicle as well during that arrest.
Okay. And so this looks like maybe something that he'd been doing in the past. And after the second arrest, where it ended in a fatality, what did the police force feel?
What was that question again?
How did the police force feel in Minneapolis after that George Floyd death?
After the death, all officers initially were just trying to figure out what happened, but a narrative came out against all the police, especially the officer involved and the officers involved. And then shortly after that, you saw what happened as far as the riots, and then the burning down of the precinct, and then the destruction of the city, and the ultimate protests throughout the city and then throughout the country.
And what was your assessment, officer, of the George Floyd incident in 2020? How did that go down, in your opinion?
Well, they set a narrative which was against the police, and that was from Governor Walz to Attorney General Ellison to the Mayor Fry of City of Minneapolis, our own chief, and the media all came against the police in regards to this incident with George Floyd.
All right. Well, officer, thank you so much for your service. And it does give us a window into what really went down this documentary. And if you're interested in watching the documentary, again, thefallofminneapolis.com, you can see it there. Thank you so much, and have a happy Thanksgiving.
All right. So there we go. And that was the officer that had arrested George Floyd just a year prior. The indications were, or at least he believed, that George Floyd had ingested drugs. And frankly, if you're dealing with someone that is an addict, someone that doesn't want to go to prison, remember George Floyd had already spent some time in jail in priors. He had moved to Minneapolis to get away from his past troubles and to start anew. Forgive me, I forget where he moved from, but he moved to Minneapolis and unfortunately got caught up doing some of the same things. This is also a man that held a gun to the stomach of a pregnant woman while he and a couple of others robbed her. Guys, when we get back from the break, we only have about a minute out or so, but I want to reintroduce you to, at least to this, the testimony of Amy Sweezy. Amy Sweezy is a prosecutor in the Minneapolis area, and she called the bluff on this case immediately after learning what the medical examiner had found. And I want to bring that information to you again to wrap this show up. It is extremely important, and I think that it'll solidify my case or my argument that Derek Chauvin should be released. Derek Chauvin should be released immediately. All of these charges against Derek Chauvin, against George Floyd, should be dropped now. We'll be back. The Carl Jackson Show. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. And guys, we are continuing with this topic. That is, Derek Chauvin should be released. He should be released immediately, as I said. Now, I want to bring back to your attention a woman by the name of Amy Sweezy. Amy Sweezy, I've talked about in a previous podcast, and now I just want to recall this information for you. because, or particularly in lieu of the new details with this new movie that is out or that is being released, The Fall of Minneapolis. thefallofminneapolis.com is where you can go to see that. And we will try to get the reporter on, Liz Collins, to interview her. But I do believe that this is a major injustice with Derek Chauvin being locked up, and it is one that the United States of America needs to correct. It is one that the state of Minnesota needs to correct. I believe that that particular case has done severe damage to policing all across the country. All right, so now Amy Sweezy is a prosecutor, a Hennepin County prosecutor, as a matter of fact. Hennepin County, Minnesota prosecutor, and she's currently suing her boss. All right, so here's something that Amy Sweezy had to say. And by the way, she's suing her boss over this particular case, over the Derek Chauvin case. She is mad that facts, or upset that facts were not brought, were not shared with the public, and also not shared in the case. So here's a quote from Amy Sweezy. It was in a deposition that Sweezy had described a conversation that she had with the Hennepin County medical examiner, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Andrew Baker, after Floyd had died. And in that deposition, here's what Amy Sweezy, had to say. She said, quote, "I called Dr. Baker early that morning to tell him about the Floyd case and to ask if he would perform the autopsy on Mr. Floyd. He called me later in the day on that Tuesday, and he told me that there were no medical findings that showed, listen to this, that showed any injury to vital structures or to Mr. Floyd's neck. There were no medical indications of asphyxia or strangulation." That is a direct quote from the medical examiner that examined George Floyd. All right. Again, she says, "I called Dr. Baker early that morning to tell him about the Floyd case and to ask if he would perform the autopsy on Mr. Floyd. He performed that autopsy. He called Amy Sweezy, again, the Hennepin, Minnesota prosecutor, called her that day once he was done with the autopsy on a Tuesday, and she says he told me that there were no medical findings that showed any injury to the vital structures of Mr. Floyd's neck." Derek Chauvin is sitting in prison for over 20 years. He's been sentenced because the lie is that George Floyd died of asphyxia or strangulation, rather than the fact that he had 2 clogged arteries, as you heard in the video with Jesse Waters of Fox News. He had a deadly amount of fentanyl in his system, and he also had COVID at the time. And we know when COVID first hit, it was a bear. All right? COVID, 2 clogged arteries, fentanyl. I would call that a deadly or a recipe for death, wouldn't you? Add to that the anxiety and stress of perhaps being arrested. Oh my goodness! By this diagnosis, it appears that Floyd was in fact not murdered by Derek Chauvin. So Sweezy continued in her deposition, and here's what she had to say. And by the way, kudos to law enforcement today.com as well for providing some of this information here. All right, so here's what Sweezy had to say as she continued in her deposition. And this was Dr. Baker speaking to, again, the Hennepin County medical examiner, speaking to Amy Sweezy, the Hennepin County prosecutor. He said, quote, "Amy, what happens when the actual evidence doesn't match up with the public narrative that everyone's already decided on?" Well, I'll tell you what happens, Doc. You do the right thing. You do the right thing. Because instead of just destroying a city, you end up destroying the entire country and our rule of law. And that's exactly what happened. The doctor was so terrified about telling the truth that he went along with the narrative. Imagine that. Imagine that. That's scary. That's scary. Now, I do want to be fair. If I recall correctly, the doctor did mention in cross-examination at one point in time that he didn't see evidence of asphyxiation or strangulation. He made no statements after that, so perhaps in his mind he thought he had done his duty. So, so there's that. So at least, if I recall correctly, he testified to the truth in cross-examination. I don't believe it was. I don't believe he volunteered that information until he was asked. Now, I could be wrong. The doctor went on to say, Dr. Baker did, this is the kind of case that ends careers. So can you imagine? Listen, any other case, any normal case, you would sit there and say, all right, police officer arrests a man dies of an arrest. If the man is white, if that guy was white, if George Floyd was a white guy, this wouldn't be an issue. Derek Chauvin wouldn't be in prison. There's no doubt about it. Derek Chauvin would not be in prison if George Floyd was white. The evidence, this evidence alone, should have been enough to flip this case. And I'm severely disappointed that the Supreme Court rejected his appeal, Derek Chauvin's appeal. I mean, this is absolutely horrible. This article goes on to say prosecutors felt extreme pressure. This, according to Alpha News, county prosecutors felt, quote unquote, extreme pressure to change Chauvin and the other three officers, or to charge Chauvin and the other three officers in Floyd's death. Several attorneys in the office, listen to this, strongly opposed charging the other three officers in the case and withdrew, citing, quote, professional and ethical rules. Guys, I want to take you back to what the gentleman said in the last block that you saw in the interview with Jesse Waters, when he said basically there was pressure in essence from people like the AG, the governor of the state, the mayor of Minneapolis, and their own police chief. Guys, I watched this is after I had read and seen the manual, the actual manual of the training that officers in Minneapolis have to put someone that is, or to subdue someone that is on drugs, that could act erratic, or that could pass out and then all of a sudden wake up. There is a particular name for it. Why it escapes me right now, I do not know. But there's a name for it. And so they had training tactics for it. The police chief of Minneapolis, a white guy, lied about his own police officer to cover his butt. He was scared of ramifications that might come his way. He was a coward, in other words. An absolute coward. Unbelievable. Sweezy's relationship with the former county attorney, Mike Freeman, went downhill after she and another attorney by the name of Patrick Lofton, withdrew from the cases against the officers on June 3rd of 2020. They wouldn't do it. They refused to prosecute them. Lofton said they were under pressure to file charges against the other three officers. Patrick Lofton, another attorney involved, said the Chauvin stuff is the catalyst of this. He said this was in a deposition on June 6th. There was extreme pressure. Yes, the city was burning down. Lofton said he did support charging Chauvin with third-degree murder, but said the pressure from outside the office was, quote-unquote, insane, and he was hesitant to charge, quote, the other three cops. In speaking about his letter advising Freeman he wanted to withdraw, Lofton said, quote, I wanted it in writing, and I wanted to make sure it was documented that I was going to let that situation, what was going on in the world, affect my judgment, because I have to sleep at night no matter what. And so I wrote the letter, and I want it to be memorialized. He says, I can tell you that everyone that I associate with to any degree, professionally or personally, agreed with our decisions. So prosecutors knew that Floyd wasn't murdered all along, but they pushed the narrative anyway. George Floyd was made into a martyr. You had a radical prosecutor or attorney general in Keith Ellison who led the prosecution of Chauvin that admitted there was absolutely no racial animus, and yet he let the city burn. Compare that to the summer of 2020, where we haven't gotten any justice for the Antifa and BLM riots. All right, guys, appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you.